welcome to the Rock is George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne. Thank you for tuning in at anchor.fm/rockisgeorge. If you're a fan of YouTube and not so much of podcast streaming platforms, you can check us out at rockisgeorge.com and click on our YouTube link. We have every episode going back to episode 8. The Rock is George podcast does stream on every major podcast from Apple to Spotify to Overcast and more. Today is episode 30 of the Rock is George podcast. I'm so glad that you've all tuned in and made it possible for me to have 30 episodes. I'm a big fan of my guest for episode 30. Her name is Lana Lane. May not be a familiar name to a lot of rock fans here in the United States, but definitely in Europe and Japan. She made a name for herself in the late 90s and early 2000s. That's actually how I discovered Lana Lane. Frontiers Music was just starting off as a record label, and Lana and her husband Erik Norlander released several albums on the label, from Lana Lane to Erik Norlander's Rocket Scientists to Erik Norlander's solo stuff. They had a pretty good thing there going. They released several albums throughout the course of 1 year on Frontiers and kind of made me a fan of the genre. I would call Lana Lane melodic rock meets prog rock. She released her first album in 1995. It was an independent release called Love is an Illusion. I'm unsure which album was the first that I heard from Lana, but certainly one of my favorites was her 2005 album, Lady Macbeth. But I have a new favorite Lana Lane album, and it came out on January 28th, 2022. It's called Neptune Blue. It's Lana Lane's first studio album in over a decade. It features her husband, Erik Norlander, on keyboards, several members of Rocket Scientists and Erik's other bands backing her up. It's a very diverse album. That was the first thing I noticed about Neptune Blue. And if you're a fan of prog rock or melodic rock or just rock in general, I think it's an album that you're going to enjoy. I was very excited to speak to Lana Lane because I am such a big fan. So here she is. If I knew absolutely nothing about Lana Lane, how would you describe your music to me?
I would say that it's symphonic rock. It's song-oriented and lushly arranged with memorable hooks, I would say.
Absolutely. And your new album is Neptune Blue. It came out on January 28th on Frontiers Music. I'm going to ask you the question that everybody's been asking you. It's been 10 years since your last album. Where have you been?
I've been here. I started a little gourmet foods business back in 2010, and that's kept me pretty busy, and just took some time off because in the beginning, as I've said many times of our career, Erik and I were putting out 2 to 4 albums a year, sometimes between Lana Lane, Erik's solo project, Rocket Scientists, and it got overwhelming. I mean, it's hard to produce that much music in a year, 3-4 albums. It's a lot of music and it's stressful. Fun, but I'm older now too, so I kind of wanted to enjoy life and not really have that continued stress. So yeah,
to a degree, I think sometimes the art suffers when you're putting out so much so fast.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we did a really good job of trying not to have that happen, being that they're 3 separate music entities. We were able to pull from different musicians, obviously. So each record definitely has its own sound. But it's still, like I said, it's you kind of feel like a machine, and you're just putting records out because it's lovely, people want them, but it's difficult. So I took some time off. My father passed away in 2010, which was really hard on me, and so I just wanted to experience life and enjoy life and the life that Erik and I created together. And my mother's elderly, so I've been able to spend some really wonderful quality time with her. So that's what I've been doing.
That's good. Family first, and you got to enjoy the finer things in life. The songs for Neptune Blue, were they a collection of songs that you've been doing over the last decade, or something that was just fresh?
A few of them Erik had written probably a couple of years ago, I would say. The bulk of the songs were written in the past year for Neptune Blue, just to be fresh and something different. You know, there's a lot of songs on there that aren't your typical Lana Lane songs, which was important to me because I really didn't feel like kind of rehashing what we had done in the past was anything new to say. So I wanted the songs to be more organic. So if a song came out naturally sounding more bluesy or more psychedelic, I wanted it to remain that way instead of trying to push it into a certain genre that people, you know, expect from me, you know, progressive or symphonic. So we just recorded them the way they came out.
As a fan myself, I noticed right away the diversity of the songs on here, and actually Neptune Blue replaces Lady Macbeth as my favorite Lana Lane album.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
I wanted to talk about some of the songs that you've released and kind of if there's a story behind it. I feel like this album has a lot of personal kind of relations to it, or it could just be things that you observe. So let's talk a little bit about Remember Me.
Remember Me is a song that Erik wrote, and it basically is about just appreciating your past, but not living in it, and moving forward and appreciating what's coming up and not just living in the past, which is kind of a significant tone for the album because that's how the songs are. They're just hopefully new sounding to people who know me, and people who don't, maybe they'll find something fresh in there as well.
Another song that you have out now is Under the Big Sky. So what's the little story behind that?
Another Erik song. Of course, he's big writer, big prolific writer in this collection. Same basic premise, just enjoying your life and appreciating everything that's around you, as opposed to just focusing in on particular things that make you happy, just trying to open yourself up to more things.
Far from home kind of touring life back in the day for you guys?
Yes. Yep. And just loving touring, but also, you know, having that little wish to go home, just to be in your own bed and to be in your own surroundings with your animals, and, you know, not being on a tight schedule of getting up early, traveling. And I know it sounds trivial, but when you do it for a long time, it does get tiring, especially for a woman traveling with guys. You know, it would be great if I could just get out of bed and get on stage and perform, but I got to go through, you know, the hair and the makeup and the costumes and stuff like that. And I would love to be able to just roll out of bed and be like a guy sometimes.
And kind of tied to that whole getting back home and being where your comfort zone is, I'm assuming Miss California is you?
Well, Miss California is actually missing California, and maybe it's me, but it's mostly just missing, you know, your life as an undocumented person, as it were.
Kind of really, actually, is that a person that you know?
Yes, but that will remain quiet.
Fantastic songs from beginning to end, I have to say. What gave you the itch to come back now?
Well, you know, Frontiers has been asking me for a while to do another record, and it just never felt right. It just kind of felt forced, and I just wasn't in a headspace to do it. As Erik and I were talking about it, he said, well, don't you, you know, miss recording and, you know, writing music? And I said, you know, I've been busy with my food business and mom, and I haven't really thought about it. And he said, well, think about it, really think about it. And so we sat down and talked about it, and we, you know, went in the studio and did some stuff. And I was like, you know what, I do miss this. And I just forgot that I missed it because, life happens and you just get wrapped up in what's going on at the moment. And so I said, okay, let's do it.
Now, obviously, Erik Norlander is your keyboardist, but he's also your husband. You guys have been
Yes.
married for decades.
32 years in March.
Excellent. Congratulations. Also, the members of your band, they're kind of like your musical family. They've been in Rocket
Yeah.
Scientist. John Payne from John Payne's Asia does some backing vocals. Everything's come together. So that was probably easy for you to kind of get the gang together.
It was awesome because we actually did a lot of the recording at John Payne's studio in Las Vegas. And we were able to be in the room with each other and record with, Jeff Coleman and Greg Ellis. And John and I were actually, in this big, beautiful room looking at each other while we did background vocals, and just really felt like old school recording the way it used to be, as opposed to, sending your tracks to someone and it being cut up and so on and so forth. This was really a collaboration and kind of a live recording, which was really nice for a change.
You mentioned a little bit about old school recording. Let's talk a little bit about how the music industry has changed since the last time you put out an album. I mean, back then you toured to sell the album. Today, the album is kind of meant to sell the tour, and it's almost free. It's a free promotional tool at this point. Was there sort of either frustrations or challenges on how putting out an album today versus 10 years ago is?
Yeah. It has changed a lot. And it's disappointing because, it's like people almost expect you to work for free, and, they're going to go and get your music however they can. And they listen to it on, little speakers. And to me, the whole music experience has been downgraded a lot. So Erik and I were very cognizant about making this a very analog and very warm album with a lot of analog instruments, and just recording it with really warm mics, and hoping that, the fans will listen to it on a stereo, hopefully, or get a record and play the record also on a stereo. Because it's just so disappointing when I hear people say, oh yeah, I listened to your song, and they were listening on the iPhone. It's like, well, how did you even get a gist of everything that goes into the arrangement and the mixing? And so it's a lot different. But if it's something you love to do, it's something you have to accept and have to deal with. There's really no getting around it. I mean, the bigger artists are still doing fine because if people are streaming, you get 2 million streams, of course you're going to get some kind of income. But for someone who gets 150 or 500 streams, it's not the same. So your dedication, I think, needs to be even more so now if you want to do music, because you're the only one who's going to be appreciating it, actually.
You're releasing Neptune. Well, you've released Neptune Blue on multiple formats. You have streaming, of course, which you have to do. You have CD, and you have an LP. Is this Lana Lane's first LP?
Yeah, which is really cool. We don't even have our copies of the CD or the album yet, so I'm excited to play myself and hear it on vinyl. It's like, ooh, because I come from, as I said, the old school where you bought albums and you looked at the artwork and you read all the liner notes, and that was all part of the listening experience, was the artwork and everything that went along with that. And that's also something that's changed and has been lost. We've tried to really have my albums be recognizable almost solely on the artwork, because if you see Jacek's artwork, you kind of know it's going to be a Lana Lane album.
Absolutely. It's I was actually going to bring up the artwork and who your cover artist was. Is it the same artist for all your albums?
Yeah, the only cover that he did not do was Secrets of Astrology, and that was a artist by the name of Michael Parks.
Okay.
He's quite well known, but That's the only one, because that album was a little bit of a departure from my other ones. It was a little harder. It was a little more harsh in the recording. It was just the time, the type of music that was popular then, and that's just how it was recorded. So we thought we'd change the artwork for that one as well.
And with Neptune Blue, you're releasing it through Frontiers Music. You started out with Frontiers a while back. I remember when the label was started. I'm pretty sure you and Erik's Rocket Scientist were kind of one of the first few artists that kind of introduced me to the European style of rock and the prog rock and stuff like that. How did you initially get signed to Frontiers?
I believe they had the European territory, because each label, when you go overseas, this time it's universal. They have worldwide. But back then they had the European market, and then of course the Japanese had the Asian market, and that's just the way it was done back then. For independents like us, each label had different categories, and how we got that, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they approached Avalon, our Japanese label. I really don't have an answer for that. I never even really thought about it.
So we'll talk about your it's a 3-album deal you have with them now, right?
Yeah.
So obviously they were reaching out and you finally said, yeah, I'm going to do it. So how has Frontiers changed today, besides bigger distribution, than they did when you first started out with them?
Well, that's interesting you would ask me that, because one of my reasons of not signing with them in the past few years is I would always look at the roster of musicians that they had. And whenever I looked at the female musicians on the roster, they're nothing like me. They're young, and it's more kind of metal, Dungeons and Skulls and stuff like that. And which is totally cool. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying I didn't understand why they wanted me, because I kind of didn't feel like I fit. And that was one of the reasons why I didn't do it a few years ago. But they told me that, because Erik passed that on to them, of course, and they said, it's because you're different, which is why we want you. And they knew me, of course, and they knew what I was about. So they signed me. And as far as how they've changed, I don't think they've changed all that much. I just think they've gotten bigger and have been able to, seduce more artists, from the past as well, because I see, artists from the 90s and the 2000s, getting deals with them, which is nice, because otherwise, no one would hear what we're doing now, really.
Absolutely. I think they're playing to an older market, even though they still have like what they call their new breed and stuff like that. But I think their market's older, and they know that.
Yeah. And so am I. So there you go.
Aren't we all?
Yes.
Do you think you're going to be able to tour?
As you kind of mentioned before, I think it depends on how the sales go.
Mm-hmm.
I think if the sales are good, and it warrants support for a tour, they would probably do it. But I don't know. I don't see a lot of their artists touring, actually.
Yeah.
But I never say never. You never know. You never know.
Yeah.
There's always hope there.
Maybe some festival will come along, some prog rock festival.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. The festival thing is something, because they did put me into Sweden Rock eons ago. So maybe again.
Speaking of eons ago, your first album came out in 1995, Love is an Illusion. And the world started taking notice of you in 1998 with Garden of the Moon. What do you remember about making that album and kind of the buzz that came after it?
Of Garden of the Moon?
Yes.
Well, that was really exciting for us, because that was back in the day of the fax machine. So when we first released Love is an Illusion, it was total independent. It was, I love the innocence of that album, because it was really us just finding, where we were and who our audience was. And we just wanted to choose great songs and play with friends who we trusted and loved. And we got a fax from this Japanese record company that ordered, at that time, 200 Love is an Illusion. And we were like, what is going on? So this is, back in the day, we faxed them back and said, of course, sent them Love is an Illusion. And then that album happened to do really well in Japan, and they asked for a second album, which was Garden of the Moon. And so for us, that was really the stepping off point for realizing that this was going to be our lives now. And so we started recording and, doing some research, because we had only done one record before that. So, you tweak things and you realize, what songs people, react to and what works. What I loved about Love is an Illusion was the little vignettes in between each song, going from one song to the other, just kind of to set up the mood. And so we carried that over into Garden of the Moon as well. So that's about what I remember about Garden of the Moon. It was our supposed big break.
Melodic rock is a tough sell. It's a tough sell to the States over here. Yeah. I mean, if it wasn't for me doing this, or if it wasn't for Frontiers, I would have never discovered melodic rock. There is this thing, the stigma, like if someone says, "Oh, you're really big in Japan," that's like, yeah, so, but that, it's almost like you are not worthy of being popular in the United States. And it's like, there's 1 billion people in Japan, right? So
yeah,
that outdoes us.
They happen to know good music.
With a lot of Frontiers artists today, everybody seems to have other projects or helping out on other projects. Like even Erik does Dukes of the Orient with John Payne, and he's working with you. And is there a chance that you could have another project with Frontiers?
Not yet. I mean, I haven't been approached with one, but we'll see. This is just the first record that was out, and we're still learning about the videos and all that stuff. But we also know that those are, you have to have videos to support the songs. There again, as an older woman, it was a little scary to do that. But then it was like, man, then when we started doing it, it was like, well, it's kind of fun, actually. It's kind of like the best of both worlds. You're performing, but you can retake things if you screw stuff up. So best of both worlds.
The videos today are a little more basic than they were when, the 80s and stuff like that. A little more cut and paste. This is just to get the song out there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They can put any background they want behind you. You find out the day that they put out the video, right?
Yeah.
Those are all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
The new album is Neptune Blue. It's out now. It's fantastic. Like I said, replaces my favorite Lana Lane album.
Oh, that's very nice of you, George. Thank you.
Once again, I want to thank Lana Lane for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out her latest album, Neptune Blue, out on Frontiers Music now. I want to thank Frontiers Music and Dustin Hardman Promotions for making the interview possible. I want to thank you for tuning into the Rock is George podcast. You've been great. I've been George Dionne, and I'll see you again soon.